Hello and welcome to Top Story. Egypt's revolution turned ugly yesterday when in a clearly choreographed surge, supporters of President Hosni Mubarak clashed with anti-government protesters. This morning, as the sun rose over Cairo's Tahrir Square, the battle was still raging. Hundreds have been injured and at least 5 other people were shot dead in the last few hours. The message from President Mubarak is clear. He is not going anywhere without a fight. As he clings on to power despite the chaos and the ensuing bloodshed, the Egyptian leader is putting Washington in a very difficult position indeed. And if he instructs the army to turn their US-funded weapons onto the people, where will this leave President Barack Obama? Joining me now to talk about this is Georges Mubarak, a senior correspondent and Middle East specialist for Le Figaro newspaper here in Paris. Georges, thanks for joining us. This is a very fluid story as we go to air, but let's start by talking about the army and its role in this crisis. Do you believe that there are actually divisions within the military as to the way in which Mubarak is handling all of this?
Most probably there is division. There is at least a debate within the establishment and the hierarchy of the army to define the best exit strategy for President Mubarak, who is part of this army. The army has been quoted by the Americans in the beginning. Yesterday, Robert Gates called his Egyptian counterpart. They said that they will still have confidence in the Egyptian army. But yesterday, we noticed that the army didn't intervene, between the pro and the anti-Mubarak. There were some clashes. There were many clashes. But I think the pressure is getting higher and higher on the army also. And we'll see tomorrow. But most probably the army will ask in the coming days to President Mubarak to withdraw from the power. But there was an interesting sequence of events last day. President Mubarak visited the headquarters of the army on Sunday, which means I'm still the chief of the army and the army is still behind me. 2 days later, the army said the claims are legitimate, which means they already stood back a little bit. So we see that slowly and slowly the army is taking the situation very clearly under its control, but they have to find this exit strategy, the best for them, because the army is the key actor in Egypt. They want to keep their privileges, and they want to also to save the face of President Mubarak.
But at the same time, it's not just the army. We've also got the state security services, which seem to be much more closely aligned to Mubarak. In fact, if anything, they're the ones who've been held responsible for yesterday's clashes, with many in Cairo saying that it was plainclothes police officers and security people who were behind most of the violence. What is the relationship like between the army and those security services?
Most probably it's a proof that there is a big clash between these two actors. And perhaps yesterday we saw huge clashes, but with not a lot of people dead, which means that there is still it's a kind of desperate attempt by the security service and the police to crush the demonstration, and perhaps also to force the army to intervene and to choose really their camp. But in fact, it didn't happen. And but we'll see today how the situation can evolve, can be.
It's a very, as you say, a very fluid story, and it's clearly changing by the second. Now, the White House has said it will review the nature of its aid agreement with Egypt, depending on how the president responds. What do you think Obama is thinking now, given what transpired in the last 24 hours?
The pressure is getting higher and higher from Washington. We saw President Obama 2 days ago. Yesterday, Clinton called Omar Suleiman, saying the transition should start now. There should be an investigation. And there is this huge stick about the $1.3 billion given every year to the Egyptian army. So it's a way to tell the Egyptian army, you should ask President Mubarak to leave the power. That's because I was very surprised. The last days, the Americans were criticizing, of course, Mubarak the way he was dealing the situation, but still quoting the army in a way to persuade them to play the big role. and the big role is to convince Mubarak to leave the power.
And the key thing, as you say, is to sort of effectively establish a dignified exit strategy for Mubarak, who is a former army person.
Yeah, and one of the best allies of the US, United States in the Middle East. So they can't also, President Obama didn't ask Mubarak to leave the country, to leave the power immediately. He can't ask. He can't make this demand. So they are also in a very difficult position with Israel behind them, trying to convince them that Mubarak is better than the future. The future means the Islamists.
And of course, just picking up on that point with Israel, I mean, the Israelis are very worried that if indeed Mubarak does go, it's what comes in his place. The concerns are, as far as the Israelis see it, is that even if it was somebody like Mohammed el-Baradei, he would still be very much playing the tune of the Muslim Brotherhood, which of course is not a partner for peace as far as the Israelis are concerned, right?
Most probably the next Egyptian leadership will have a different policy towards Israel than the previous one, than Mubarak and Omar Suleiman, and that the reason why the Israelis are very worried. There was a huge and very good cooperation between Omar Suleiman, the chief of intelligence, and the Mossad and the Israeli apparatus, and the Israelis are afraid, most probably under the pressure of the Muslim Brotherhood, which will be the main actor even though they will not win the elections, but they will have 25-30% of the votes, and under that pressure, they will force the new Egyptian leadership to have a much tougher policy towards Israel than Mubarak used to have.
Now, you mentioned there Omar Suleiman. He is now Vice President. He's the head of the intelligence service. He's a man who's respected in Washington and also in Jerusalem. Do you think that at the moment he's doing what he can in order to convince the president to step down?
He was the number 2 of the regime, even though he didn't have this post before. He's the closest friend of President Mubarak, and most probably he's trying to convince him to step down, but I'm not sure that Mubarak didn't get until now the right signal to leave the country, either from the army, either from his family also, and nor from Omar Suleiman. But the fate of Omar Suleiman is really linked with the fate of Mubarak. As long as Mubarak has left the power, Omar Suleiman and Ahmed Shafiq, the new prime minister, would regain a little bit legitimacy. And as you noticed yesterday, el-Baradei and some leaders of the oppositions agreed to talk with Omar Suleiman, but after the withdrawal of Hosni Mubarak. So it's also for Suleiman and Shafiq a very sensitive and very delicate game they have to play.
And certainly when you talk about the fact it is a very sensitive and delicate game, no doubt Washington is making many frantic phone calls to people on both sides. Yeah,
because as you said previously, Washington is betting on the army, which will also guarantee the peace treaty with Israel. The army is the main tool for Washington. The army, Omar Suleiman, they know him very well. So we saw that there were many phone calls, mainly from the Pentagon, and it's very interesting because we see really the link between the U.S. Army and the Egyptian army. So that's the main. I think now the connection is through this channel.
Now, do you think Mohammed el-Baradei, the opposition leader, has what it takes in order to pull together a unity government if indeed President Mubarak does step aside?
I think Mohammed el-Baradei has been used by the Muslim Brotherhood as the front player, but the problem of Mohammed Baradei is that he has no legitimacy in Egypt. He has no networks, but is of course an acceptable face mainly for the Muslim Brotherhood behind him. But this game is worrying the international community.
George Maburuno, thank you so much. That's it for this edition of Top Story. Stay tuned for more news and headlines.